Chris Robertshaw, the Crogga licence expired at the weekend. What's gone wrong?
Well, in a nutshell, the government's gone wrong. I'm appalled at what the latest DOI minister is saying in defence of her department. It's pretty well all inaccurate and misrepresents the true situation. I don't know whether she does understand the real situation and isn't willing to promulgate the truth to the public, or whether actually she's just been misled by her department. I've heard she's done a couple of interviews over the last couple of days, riddled with inaccuracies, really just quite awful, and trying to completely wash away responsibility for the fiasco we find ourselves in on the part of DOI, where the blame truly lies, and I'd be happy to go through the points with you. So blame Crogga and relinquish any responsibility when the reverse is the case. So let me. I'm talking now, incidentally, Jim, as a shareholder and somebody, as an ex-politician who cares hugely about the future of the Isle of Man, our children and grandchildren, because we're not heading in a very good direction at the moment. And I've always seen the Crogga project as an opportunity to release and identify a huge national asset which could bring huge benefit to the island, which, because of DOI's conduct now, is denied us, and that's a shame. So the how to sort of capture it in a nutshell is that whatever DOI is saying to the contrary, DOI placed 3 specific roadblocks in the way, and it's a little bit like, it's a poor analogy, I suppose, but is imagining one road to a town through a pass, and the authorities place numerous roadblocks in the way, and then accuse the person trying to get to the town that the authority oversees for failing to get there, blaming them. And what are those 3 major roadblocks? The first is compensation. It's been rumoured recently that somehow Crogga was unwilling to pay compensation to the senior tenant of the Crogga field, which is Ørsted. They signed their licence 3 years prior to Crogga. They signed up in 2015. Crogga signed up in 2018. There is a recognised and legitimate requirement where there's a conflict between the two, if they both sat there working at the same time, that compensation may be due. Now, the difference between the position that DOI have taken and Crogga have taken is very clear. Crogga has said, yes, okay, we accept there may be a need for some form of compensation, and we're willing to fully recognise and deal with it, but only under the terms of international or national British best practice. And how that occurs, and as you know, with your commercial background, you get it straight away. Crogga will enter into the process happily, as long as there's an independent arbitrator put in to establish fair and reasonable practice. Which is the way you'd expect it to be, and that's the way it works in the UK. It's all described in UK government proper conduct, best practice. What Ørsted want Crogga to do, and what DOI fully support, is the idea that, if you like, the amount, when it's paid, what it relates to, will all depend upon Ørsted. The ball is completely in their court, including not allowing the whole process to go forward in the way it should. So that alone puts Crogga in a hopeless position, and any investor would pull away from that if they knew that a company in which they wanted to invest, or a project, was effectively potentially open to, had provided an open checkbook to the other party, and they would just shy away from it completely. So that put Crogga in an impossible position in isolation. The next major roadblock relates to the provision of drilling regulations and legislation related to that sort of work offshore. How can I best describe this? When Horizon and ELF conducted their work around about 1996 in what then had already become territorial waters for the UK, for the Isle of Man, I do apologise. It took Tynwald somewhere between 25 minutes and 40 minutes to pass all the necessary regulations through Tynwald, which effectively said, in simple terms, you see those regulations in the UK, they apply to the work being done by Horizon and ELF. And we recognise that it has to be identical to the UK's if these various contractors coming in would ever consider exploration in the Crogga, in the Manx national waters. So that was pretty quick. Crogga signed its licence in 2018. 6.5 years later, there's still no regulations, still no legislation in place. And what clearly Michelle Hayward doesn't understand is that Crogga cannot move without those regulations being in place. It's a little bit like, a house. A builder couldn't possibly enter into the process of building a house if there were no building regulations in place. It's the same thing. You absolutely have to have them. Michelle seems to be under the total misapprehension that somehow Crogga can start acting and engaging investors' money before the various things are in place. And clearly she doesn't understand, or DOI doesn't understand, or they're pretending they don't understand, and they're not willing to tell the public the truth. The third point, the third blockage, is connected with timing as to where it is now. And I'll try and describe this in simple terms if I can. Is that Ørsted require very specific information from Crogga if by December of 2026, if Ørsted are able to move forward. Here we are now, we're getting on now into spring of 25. Crogga cannot provide the information Ørsted want unless the regulations are in place allowing Crogga to act. And even when the regulations are in place, there's a tremendous amount of work that Crogga has to complete in order to, as it were, qualify to move itself forward. And it's a work period of around about 9 months once the regs are in place. That takes us pretty close to the point at which Ørsted demand certain information. And so that's the other roadblock. There's no regulations. There's no understanding with regard to what's best practice with the compensation process, and the timings, the time scale of everything now is completely impossible. So Crogga Stanley had no choice but to say, well, we can't go forward with this. And now Michelle Hayward is doing her absolute best to blame everything on Crogga, and it's not very nice. It's unacceptable.
How much do you think the minister's current view on fossil fuels is allowing her to cloud her judgment over this? She was well known during the election campaign to be wholly against the extraction.
I think she said. I mean, I've just listened to an interview where she specifically said she is. I consider. I'll just answer it this way. I think her behaviour right now is totally disingenuous, and I'm serious there. I think she's just trying to be rather clever when clearly she hasn't got a commercial cell in her body. Otherwise, she'd understand these basic things that I've tried to describe to you now. Or She's not delving into things, and her officers are saying what they want. But she's not alone. It's not just Michelle. The department itself is very, very clearly determined that this shouldn't happen.
Do you think there's a lack of a real government policy on this? Because it seems to be certain departments left to be sort of, getting on with this in isolation, when really the whole issue of the extraction of hydrocarbons for the benefit of the Isle of Man should be an overall national policy. It shouldn't be really left, surely, for one department just to be dealing with.
Well, I mean, you've touched on a very important point there, Jim. The department is making its own mind up about what it wants. I would put it to you that the right way to proceed now, if there's a way at all, is for government to go out to the people and say, what do you want? What do you think is right? Do you want to find out whether this asset can be released, and do you want to know how much it's worth, and do you want to understand what fabulous value it would bring to the Isle of Man? Yes or no? And if the people say yes, then the government should get on with that as a policy. What's actually happened is DOI have decided to take a particular route, a route against the concept of recovering fossil fuels, and has an absolute contempt for the public. And what I'm saying to you, therefore, is that actually there's a divide developing between what is a pretty obese government, overlarge government, going in whatever direction the various departments think they should go, and the will of the people. So I would put it to you, I think we're losing our democracy.
And there's been lots of critics about Crogga and various accusations around that, they didn't have the funding, they didn't have the money. Do you think, is that, I mean, what would you say to those people?
There's been a huge amount of ill will floating around towards Crogga. And
why is that?
Well, I'm determined to defend Crogga's position because Crogga is the licensee and government is the licensor. And you, again, as a commercial person, will understand that a licensee and a licensor will work together behind closed doors to resolve issues. What's actually happened is that there's been a sort of a tumult of criticism against Crogga from the department itself. But Crogga has felt it inappropriate to defend itself in the public because it would mean that during the time the licence existed, that it would be criticising the government in public. It's not Crogga didn't see its role as going out into the public arena to negotiate with government. It saw quite professionally the right thing to do was to negotiate with the government. So it's government, it's DOI that's been playing fast and loose and encouraging this huge variety of misunderstandings. For example, there's been huge question attached to Crogga's credibility. What people need to understand is that Crogga went through a fulsome 3-month due diligence process with the UK national NSTA, North Sea Transition Authority, which is probably the most respected offshore oil and gas regulator in the world. And having gone through that due diligence, it passed perfectly well, was loaded into all our systems, awaiting the opportunity to start work here. So that was absolute nonsense. What a lot of people also don't know, and this here I want to talk a few moments about Chris Thomas always saying, well, don't worry, there's always another way forward, we can go to the majors. In reality, what happened was that DOI in the first instance, and I'm going back a decade now, went out to the majors, fuel and oil companies, and said, are you interested in doing this? They said no. And so in an effort to keep it going, DOI then sought effectively a startup on the Isle of Man, and Crogga was it. And so what we've got here is a situation where Crogga came into being at the auspices of government. Since then, it's been utterly hopeless. There's a lot of nonsense surrounding the issue of, Crogga should be doing the 3D seismic first. DOI was obsessed with that. But at one point, DOI called in external consultants, I think they're called RPS, forgive me if I haven't got that absolutely right. RPS came and said, no, what Crogga is saying, that you should do the appraisal well first, is absolutely correct. It's as if DOI have become completely blind to that. Michelle says you should have done the appraisal well. Sorry, I beg your pardon, you should have done the 3D seismic. And then later on we would have got the regs in for you. That completely misunderstands the situation. A company can't go into a process costing millions, multi-million pounds, if it couldn't see the way forward. And of course, the way forward was completely opaque because government was not indicating when and how it would get the regulations on board. No company on earth would venture forward in the environment that Crogga found itself with all these roadblocks in place. I'm just wondering what else I might raise with you. Oh yes, there's another story about if this doesn't work, we can try something else. I think people, your viewers must I would ask your viewers to appreciate that the Rampside processing plant in the UK, where the gas would go to, has got a very specific life, to some degree dictated by the amount of business it gets out of the Irish Sea. And in the event of the Crogga project not happening in the near future, it's very likely that the life expiry point of that plant will come right back. So it could well be that if we wait much longer, there will be no ability for the gas to be processed, and therefore there'll be no point in going forward at all.
And do you think that's the ultimate game? They're just trying to run the clock down on this? As in, the department has no real appetite to do this?
I think all the way through, the department has shown itself determined to dance to Ørsted's tune, on timescales and on compensation, etc., etc. And I think they've lost the Crogga project. There's absolutely no guarantee that the Ørsted project will happen, and I could go into some detail with you there if you wish, but it's tied up with what's called contract for difference. It's the willingness or otherwise of the UK government to subsidise the Ørsted field, and it means a socialist government would have to subsidise a field outside its own territorial waters, in territorial waters owned by the socialist government would see a tax haven. And so would the UK big government be comfortable with seeing the Isle of Man benefit from UK taxpayer subsidy to a facility not within its territorial waters? Very, very questionable indeed. And also, of course, I think we've also gone past what you might call peak wind farm. They're beginning to see that the finance companies that come in after the likes of Ørsted to take over the project are beginning to see the term life of these wind farms to be a lot shorter than anticipated. And the bigger these wind farms get, the more maintenance costs there is. And they're seeing the profitability element of that project for them to get narrower and narrower, such that they're beginning to pull out. And in fact, Ørsted recently got authority to take the round 4 of a huge wind farm off East Anglia. They got granted it in round, whatever it was, round 6 or something, and they've pulled out. And they've pulled out because, I presume, and I don't know, but they've pulled out, I presume because they're simply not getting the finance structures in place to allow them to go ahead. So what I think what's going to happen is, sadly, we're going to lose certainly lost Crogga, possibly as an outsider looking in, possibly going to lose the wind farm as well.
Is there no future now for Crogga with the Isle of Man government? Would it, if a new licence was to be issued? Could
Well-
the project pick up where it left off?
Well, Tynwald has said it won't issue another licence, but
But
you
of
know,
course,
could-
Tynwald is only a declaratory.
Yeah,
It's
it
not
could-
law.
Okay, fine. So there's nothing to stop. I mean, this is me speaking now, and I do not represent, in anything I've said, I don't represent the board of Crogga. I hope that everything I'm saying to you is true and factual. I believe it absolutely to be so. Here I'm going to offer my own particular viewpoint on something, and it's this. That you've got to bear in mind DOI, prior to Crogga coming up into existence, tried to get majors involved and failed. It's tripped over its own confusion with Crogga, but there are middle-sized operators there out in the field, and Crogga. I know Crogga directors have two deeply held views and responsibilities: one towards their own shareholders, and one towards the Isle of Man, that they hold, in very high esteem and great importance, care hugely about it. And I think looking at both of those, I think Crogga might be persuaded to pick up its license again, save reissuing a new one, pick it up its license, and then act as an organisation to farm out the leadership of that license to a middle-ranking oil and gas company, and sort of work in conjunction with them to bring it to fruition, so that the Isle of Man won hands down over its own asset, and government could get some comfort out of the fact that for some unknown reason they just don't want to deal with Crogga. So there would be another player in position. Crogga would be the junior partner. These are just ideas, and the people would find out. But I think the first thing that would need to be done is that I think the government now need to go out to the public of the Isle of Man in some sort of very well professionally structured poll, because although I believe in referenda, I don't think we can put all that in place. If we just got a really good poll and assessment of what do the people of the Isle of Man want, get that in place quickly, follow through with those ideas, yes, it could happen again, on one condition. And that condition is that DOI removed those three roadblocks we've discussed, so that they weren't in the way of whoever then delivers the project. Because I can promise you and guarantee that unless and until DOI remove these roadblocks, there will be no further activity.